The thing that I've learned from Futures is the most valuable thing Futures has taught me is to challenge assumptions. I go and I turn on a light switch and, I don't even think about whether the light is going to come on or not. And I think a lot of us in business and in society and in our daily lives, we just assume that the world is going to keep spinning and operating the way that it does. And
Yeah.
Futures thinking is really good at not every time, not every day, but carving out a space to say, but what if the light didn't turn on?
Gabe, welcome to Think Forward.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Gabe, we've known each other for a couple of years. I think you're one of the most interesting people to talk to. My grandmother would call you a character. As we talk about experiences in life, I think your journey is, the nomadic futurist, as I will kind of call you these days. Yeah. How did you come to, what's been your journey through this space and how you kind of got into it?
Yeah, well, Steve, the first thing I learned kind of entering the futures field is no one can predict the future. And like the next 10 years, you never know what's going to happen. And my goodness, when I look back over my last 8 years as a professional futurist, I'm like, those words could not have had been truer, right? I never would have imagined that today I'd be in the position where I'm at, kind of gone through the journey that I have. And so, no one can predict the future. And 10 years is a really long time for things to look fundamentally different than you imagine, fundamentally different than kind of how you expected, fundamentally different than they were when you first started. So, I like to think of it, Steve, as like I'm living proof of that, living testimony of that notion.
You talk about the 10-year horizon. And you're part of the Institute for the Future out of California. And, they're famous. They do their 10-year project every year. How do you find that? Because obviously as futurists, we don't predict the future, right? We look at the possible futures. How have you found, if you've looked back at 10-year forecasts or horizons, have you seen big hits, big misses, big bullseyes?
Yeah, Steve, it's so interesting. The Institute for the Future, we've been around, for several decades now, and we always look back, just kind of what were we thinking about? What were we talking about? And, obviously there are the ones that you get, correct, the ones that, researchers kind of hit on the nose, ones that probably futures that went in a different direction that you weren't expecting. Sometimes you're a little disappointed. My goodness, I wish this industry really would have taken this seriously. Or I wish this player would have really jumped on that opportunity. It would have been so amazing. But I think what we're really looking for when we look back at futures work that we do is, did we spark conversation? Did we engage people around provocative ideas that kind of move the needle forward in very positive ways for individuals, for organizations, and also just for society at large. So when we're looking back, I think it's less of what did we get right? What didn't we get right? It's more of, did we get the right people to come to the table and engage in proper, futures work?
Do you think that they did?
I think in many respects, yes, absolutely, right? I think that's why the Institute for the Future has been around as long as it has. Obviously, we're not experts in any particular industry. We choose not to be. I think one of the exciting things that we're seeing today is, more and more futurists entering the space. And you can think that's really scary for, someone like the Institute for the Future. But in a way, we kind of welcome it, right? It's amazing that more and more people are interested in the futures field, are interested in future study, are interested in bringing kind of these roles internally within their organizations. I think that's a very exciting thing.
Well, and that goes to like, you've had 4 roles there. You've been there about 8 years, right? And yeah, so you're the director of Scalable Foresight. I mean, that kind of speaks to, many people we've talked to on the show about growing this in an organization, making it usable. And like you said, there's more people in the field, many, doing the work and really exploring things. So do you find that's a sign of a healthy organization, or like do you find the opposite?
Yeah, Steve, I joined the Institute as a research assistant,
Hmm.
supporting Bob Johansen, former
Yeah.
president of the Institute, distinguished fellow there now. And, Bob kind of had this notion, and, we joke about it all the time, but, Bob brings on young people who, his definition, are purposefully different than him. Right, you're different than him in an interesting way,
Yeah.
and the idea was to just come for 2 years, kind of help Bob and learn from Bob and learn the future's craft, and then kind of see what would happen next.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, I joined and I started supporting Bob, and we kind of broke the mold. At the end of 2 years, we kind of looked at each other and said, we kind of like, the way we're working. We like the way we push on each other's ideas. Let's continue to
Hmm.
work together. Continued on kind of evolving and the evolution of different roles. Eventually, the Institute was gracious enough to allow me to create my own role, Director of Scalable Foresight. I did Google this. I looked on LinkedIn. I have not found anyone who has a right? And I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. Maybe it's not. But, the Institute allowed me to create this role out of the need that I saw, which is, futures thinking is really becoming popular. It's becoming necessary. It's becoming understandable to business leaders. It's becoming understandable to nonprofit leaders, to government leaders, that thinking about the future is important, and the future is very disruptive. The future is very chaotic. The future is kind of at the mercy of rapid transformation. And so Director of Scalable Foresight came out of this notion of working with organizations who were faced with this challenge of, how do we right size futures thinking in our org? Is it just one person? Is it one team? Is it everyone who should be doing this? Is it 50% of our time spent on the future? Is it 5% of our time? And so, as Director of Scalable Foresight, I've been fortunate enough to work with organizations of all shapes and sizes, all industries, all sectors, really all around the world, to kind of tackle that question of how much futures thinking, how much strategic foresight, how much anticipating of the future should you be bringing into your org? What does that look like, and who's responsible for that?
So you mentioned you have a couple principles around this. Do you can you walk through those? I think that'll help frame it for people as well. What
Yeah,
the problem?
the
Yeah.
principles are kind of constantly evolving and constantly shifting, but
Hmm.
there's, I think, five that I'm really kind of honing in on. Some of the most important ones is, and some of these feel counterintuitive, Steve, but one of the ones that I've learned in doing this work is sometimes having the boss in the room is actually a disservice to the process. Right? You think, wow, we've got the boss, we've got the CEO, we've got the executive sponsor in the room. This is going to be so great. And then you go through the process of futures thinking, which is, let's present some ideas that are fundamentally different than how the world operates today. And they seem a little ridiculous, they seem a little silly. And what tends to happen is really smart, brilliant people notice that the boss is in the room and they don't want to look foolish. They don't want to say something seemingly ridiculous, because we've been told in the corporate world, you're supposed to be serious. You're not supposed to have fun. You're not supposed to throw these ridiculous ideas out there. But, Steve, what you and I know from futures thinking is that that's where the real conversation starts.
Right.
That's where the real conversation is birthed, from those seemingly ridiculous futures, where we engage and we talk about, well, what are the insights? What does this mean? How do we move towards action to run towards these futures or run away from these futures? And so one of the principles of scalable foresight is, you obviously need that executive sponsor, that executive permission, but sometimes you need to ask the boss in the room, hey, I need you to leave for a little bit, because we really need to get everyone brewing these seemingly ridiculous ideas, these seemingly ridiculous futures. And that can limit the creativity, that can limit the process in ways that we hadn't anticipated before.
That's great. I think that this kind of leads to what I call the lonely futurist
Yeah.
problem. I've seen this, and I'm curious how much you've seen this as well in terms of creating scalable foresight is, somebody joins a company, first foresight hire, maybe also, or they come in as a different thing, but they're the foresight person. They kind of evangelize it, do some great work, build, maybe a little bit of a circle or tribe or, whatever, whatever shape that is, but they leave and then the capability evaporates. And, do you see that a lot? And if you why do you think this happens?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're a podcast host or someone wanting to be interviewed on podcasts as a guest, visit podmatch.com. Podmatch automatically connects ideal podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. We always say it works just like a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. Podmatch has connected over 85,000 guests and hosts together for interviews that listeners love, all while saving you countless hours of administrative work through built-in automations. If you're ready to level up your podcast interviews on either side of the mic, start today by visiting podmatch.com.
Yeah, Steve, that's a great question. And, it's actually one of the 5 principles, right, that I talk about in Scalable Foresight is never future alone. And that's for several reasons. One is the reason that you just highlighted, the reason that you just pointed out. Sometimes you get people in an organization who get it, who understand it. Then there's others who have skepticism. And, a healthy dose of skepticism is great. It's wonderful. It's necessary. But when you can't draw the link and you can't make the connection, the theory versus the practice, the 10 years out versus what do we start to do today? What do we do tomorrow? There's that inherent disconnect. The other side of it, Steve, is that there's just no way to avoid our own biases. There's no way to avoid just kind of my own life experiences, my own opinions, my own just kind of humanness. And so one of the only ways that I think is helpful in combating our own kind of judgments and blind spots is to bring others who think differently than us. I talked about Bob Johansson's requirement for different than me in an interesting way. I think that's a perfect standard for finding a futurist community. Find someone who understands and gets the value of futurist thinking, who thinks differently than you, who has a different life experience than you, because that's when you get to push on each other's ideas and perspectives and really not be blindsided into going down just one future path, but really considering alternative futures and trying to measure the worthiness of those futures and the impacts for yourself, your organization, and society at large.
Yeah, I think about you've talked about this, like foresight needing to be collective. I think there's different models out there. I mean, have you seen organizational models that work well?
I've seen a lot of organizational models. I think this definition of works really depends on what the end goal is, right? And Steve, leads me to the third principle of scalable foresight, which is you have to understand strategic foresight, thinking about the future, is not about finding the answer. Oftentimes I go into organizations and I'm helping them kind of understand, how they do strategic foresight internally. And it seems like their goal is to get to an answer. It seems like their goal is, and that's just natural, right? I mean, obviously we would think that we want to get to the answer, but what I have to coach these folks on, what I have to really convince them of, is sometimes the end goal is not getting to the perfect answer. It's uncovering a question you didn't even know existed. It's uncovering a new problem or a new challenge that is likely to blindside you, which if it does come to pass could be detrimental to you, right? I mean, imagine, these organizations that are long gone now, right? An organization like, I don't know, Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster shouldn't have been trying to look for the answer, but looking for that blind spot, looking for that new question of what if the world shifts? What if the world operates in a new way that we're not used to, that we haven't been paying attention to? What happens then, right? I mean, there are countless examples in business and society at large where you're not looking for the answer. Strategic foresight, can help you come up with a answer. I don't think it's going to be the answer unless you're very lucky. But strategic foresight really should be used. The collective thinking should be used to identify new challenges, new opportunities, new kind of blind spots on the horizon. And you monitor those, right? You see you track them over time. You're not going to take everything seriously all at once. You're not going to try and address every single thing every single day, every single moment, but you're going to be wise and kind of tracking and understanding the evolution of those challenges, of those blind spots, even of those emergent opportunities.
When I see M&A groups and PE firms using foresight more because they're trying to figure out what the possible futures are in terms of investment or divestiture, and it's becoming an important part of the decision matrix and how they look at risk and investment. And it also comes to the use of course, everybody talks about AI right now, but you have obviously strong opinions about, as do I. And you worked on the new edition with Bob for Leaders Make the Future, but you also make this argument that it's a tool of augmentation, not automation. So, I'd love to hear you make the case for that. I'm not going to say I agree or disagree, because a lot of people are looking at, this to get rid of labor or how to optimize. So you've got some pretty specific views on that.
Yeah. Steve, I had the privilege of working with Bob Johansson and the third colleague of ours, Jeremy Kirschbaum, on the third edition of Leaders Make the Future, which was kind of looking at the 10 new skills to humanize leadership in an era of generative AI. And so, to Bob and to Jeremy's credits, they approached me and said, we'd like you to join as a third. And I said, I will join on the one condition that you let me be the skeptic, that the role that I play in this book and in kind of writing and pushing our ideas is to kind of, not let ourselves get too over fascinated with the possibilities, but really present some difficult challenges. And so, to Bob and to Jeremy's credit, they said, absolutely. We think that's necessary. We think that's needed. And so we started the process, and, in classic kind of IFTF format, we started looking at generative AI from the present forward view. How are people, how is the industry, how are, governments and regulators thinking about AI today, and kind of how they anticipate its impact in the future? We looked into that, we studied that, we talked to experts around the world on that. And then we did the future back view. Let's forecast out 10 years in the future and work backwards. And so we came up with this juxtaposition of generative AI in general, but more specifically, generative AI in the present forward view and the future back view. And we kind of outlined these different areas of, if you actually think future back, here's a really exciting role that generative AI can play. Today, the present forward view is that of automation. We're just going to automate work. We're going to automate processes. We're going to automate the human out of the process. And the present forward view, the present forward argument is that of automation, that of removing the human from the center, putting generative AI there, and just doing things more efficiently. Steve, it turns out that if you look at the history of work, specifically office work, kind of professional collar work, everything has been, over the last kind of several hundred years, for the purpose of efficiency, doing things cheaper, doing things faster, doing things more efficiently.
Human labor and human function, right? It's been about the machine and the energy, the human, not the mental, But I just want, that to me is the big dividing line of the last, thousands of years. It's always been about improving human production and labor and energy behind that. So
That's right,
yeah.
Steve. And so, you can even think about it beyond just white collar work, right? Just kind of
Yeah.
labor in general, as you're saying. But
Yes.
if you really look at it, we've kind of hit the ceiling. I think, humbly, we've hit the max. So there's so much less, more efficiency. There's very little less efficiency that we can keep creating. We can kind of push beyond. What we should be focusing on is effectiveness, right? Like, how do I get the job, the function, the role done, not just efficiently, but effectively, right? And I think they come coupled together, but we've been over indexing on efficiency and not effectiveness. And in a world of misinformation, in a world of disinformation, in a world where generative AI gives you very confidently an answer that turns out to be incorrect, or that turns out to just be one part of the broader picture, I would much rather go for effectiveness than efficiency. You may remember this from, maybe it was 2-3 summers ago, Steve, but like, there was this viral moment where people were going on a GPT and asking it, what is 2 + 2? And it very confidently kept saying the answer was 3. And you could not convince the AI that 2 + 2 did not equal 3. I mean, it gave you a very efficient, very quick answer, but it was very wrong. I mean, there's other classic examples of like how many R's are in the word strawberry. And I'm sure, if you do it today, I'm sure they've kind of fixed those things. But, it was saying very clearly there are 2 R's in strawberry. And people were like, no, there's actually 3.
3. There's 3.
There was this disconnect. And, again, it was created to give you very efficient answers. You churn in a question, it churned out an answer very, very quickly, very efficiently. But we started to realize that those answers were wrong. Those answers couldn't be trusted. Those answers might be really good, or they might be really bad. And it ended up causing us more time, more energy, more resources to triple check, to double check, to fact check that. And so again, the future back view is not this story of automation. It's this story of augmentation. It's not the story of finding answers. It's the story of pushing your ideas, pushing your narrative in new and interesting ways. We have Google. Don't use generative AI as Google because you have Google. Why would you use a new tool in a way that you're already using other tools, especially when the process is broken, when the process doesn't necessarily work?
Well, and I think that it kind of focusing that down into the work of a futurist, right? If AI is handling signal gathering, the data crunch, right, the static work, as we like to call it, what does it free up? Because I also look at safe futures, right? It's like, what is really coming out of the system itself? What do you think it allows and frees up the human futurist to actually do in this case?
Yeah. Well, Steve, again, back to that augmentation story,
Yeah,
right? I mean, the automation
exactly.
story takes the human out of the center. The augmentation story keeps the human in the center. It understands how far the human goes, and then it deploys generative AI at the edge of your competence. And when you look at it that way, you can go so much further. And so, when it comes to futures work, I have yet to see a GPT, a generative AI platform that is just really good at finding provocative signals and turning them into scenarios. I think if you feed it something to begin with and then say, this is as far as I got, how far can you go? That's when you get really interesting, provocative places. That's where the GPT really shines and really thrives. The framework that I use, Steve, is challenge, augment, reframe. I have my own idea of a topic. I have my own idea of a future. I have my own understanding of the implications. And I want to use a GPT. I want to use conversation. I want to use a process to challenge that idea, right? Kind of give me the counter argument, to augment it, kind of show me this idea in a new light, in a new context, a new way of thinking, or to reframe it, to say, you know, you've been thinking about this in one way, here's a totally different way where your thinking kind of doesn't address that. Challenge, augment, reframe. I think if you use generative AI as an augmentation tool, that process of challenge, augment, reframe becomes really powerful when you in an AI, you know, when you're using generative AI to augment yourself in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think about the gathering of stuff. I actually put the person in two places. I put it in the like you said, the gathering part, then the review and the maybe adding more of the provocative parts, and then putting it into the system, and then bringing it back down. It's almost like the diamonds in design thing, you know, kind of the focus, you know, go out, go come back, type of process. And do you think we're entering a golden age of foresight? Because it's the field itself is going through a lot of ups and downs, and like you said, there's a lot more people doing it. Some are doing the work, some are hitched onto the term for clout or for other reasons. There's a lot of good people doing this kind of work. I mean, do you think we're there? You think we're on the path because of what's been driving this?
You know, Steve, I think we're at a tipping point. You know,
okay. Yeah, please. Yeah, expand on that. Yeah.
So, you know, I noticed this. I lived through COVID-19 as a futurist, right?
Right.
I'm living through the chaos of the world today, kind of geopolitically, economically, socially,
Yeah.
you know, technologically, environmentally, all of the things that are happening. And I think people's definition, and I hear this from my clients all the time, is, Gabe, 10 years is great. You know, in an ideal world, we'd be thinking about 10 years. But shouldn't futures thinking just like go out 3 years? Like something could happen on the global stage tomorrow that completely does away with what you're talking about. And so why would we go out 10 years? So Steve, I do think we're at this interesting tipping point where,
Yeah.
like, yes, people are understanding the need for futures thinking, and something like COVID, something like a new war, something like, you know, a new political figure could come on stage and really disrupt things. And we should think about kind of challenging those assumptions. But if that one thing, if that one event, if that one person, if that one kind of social behavior changes, then, you know, it changes everything in the next year. So why would we look beyond the next year? And it's this push and pull. And so, you know, Steve, my kind of humble request of people entering the future space is, be true to the 10-year time frame. For most professional futurists, you and I know this, 10 years seems to be that sweet spot. You know, sometimes it's further out, sometimes it's shorter. But we can't allow ourselves, just out of fear, just out of, you know, constant disruption, out of constant chaos, to really shrink in that timeline, because it moves us away from what at the core is futures thinking.
So, you know, think about like educating futurists, right? It's like, obviously you guys have a legendary bit of curriculum. I've done them. they're awesome. I've done a lot of different foresight training. What do you think we need to do to train the next generation? Like, what would you change? What would you improve? What would you add? What do you think's, you know, what's missing right now?
That's a great question. You know, I think future space has kind of lived in this very academic space, this very theoretical space, right? Futurists go off and do this great work and come up with these grand ideas. But we lack futurists that can pull the thread and say, so what does this mean for policy? What does this mean for business decision? What does this mean for hiring decisions, right? I mean, you kind of, futurists are known for leading the horse to water and then saying, all right, horse, up to you if you're going to drink or not, right? And I've seen this happen countless times at the Institute for the Future. I mean, brilliant foresight. I mean, some of our, just kind of brilliant researchers who are in this day in and day out come up with these provocative visions of possible futures and scenarios. And then the organization, the business, the client, the partner that we're working with decides we're not going to do anything about it because we don't know how. We don't understand how to carry this forward other than just wait, other than wait and see. And so my hope is that the next evolution, the next generation of futurists learns how to take theory and research and kind of the academic side of it and really turn it into practice without kind of tarnishing it in a way that just turns you into a basic consultant. And I think consultants are great, right? No knock to them, but I don't think we should be trying to just replace what consultants do, right? Kind of, the space that consultants are in, but really pull the thread of being that translator. Pulling out the key insights and saying, let's build a future back roadmap to get us from where we are today to where we want to be in the future.
Well, you have seen a lot, like I said, of clients, but also cities. I mentioned earlier, they called you the Nomadic Futurist. You've been to, I believe, you live in 16 cities over 3 years. Is that accurate? Is that correct?
That's right. I'm currently in Dallas, Texas, my 16th city.
Yep. So I guess for me, like you see the future cities, efficiencies, non-efficiencies, it's cut a lot. And that's been globally. That's not just the United States, right? So there's a lot of different flavors of things. What's your favorite one? And then one that surprised you? Yeah, good. I know, because what stood out to you? Because it's a lot to live. It's a lot to move in these places, and you get to see a lot of different environments, man. So
yeah. So Steve, I should mention that, this journey actually started off of a signal of change.
Okay. Great.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, we were looking at different things, and one of the signals that popped up was a remote worker incentive program. The one that I found was out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa, Oklahoma is probably one of the oldest programs to kind of run this. You see this all over the world now. But kind of city and state and federal governments now will give people incentives, a tax incentive. They help you buy your first house. Tulsa, Oklahoma gave me cold hard cash and said, come live here for a year and we'll give you X amount of money. The idea is to revitalize the local economy, to bring outside talent, especially young talent that's focused on STEM and tech in particular, to kind of bring them back to these parts of the world that have been suffering or that don't have enough diversity or representation, and kind of hope that they'll fall in love, that they'll create community, that they'll stay there. So this journey actually started off by finding that signal and saying, hey, that's kind of cool, right? I mean, I was living in Palo Alto, in Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, very expensive. COVID-19 had disrupted work. I was working from home anyways. And so I said, there's really no reason to stay in Palo Alto. So I packed up my bags. I got accepted to the Tulsa, Oklahoma program, did it for a year. Tulsa's great. Tulsa's wonderful, but I knew that it wasn't kind of my forever home. And I also knew that I didn't want to move back to Palo Alto. I didn't want to, at least at that time, didn't want to just go back to the way things were. So I decided to do this on my own. And since then, I've just kind of been bouncing around from city to city. And, the idea here, Steve, is eventually I will find someone, something, somewhere worth settling down for. And until that happens, I'm just going to keep exploring. I'm going to keep kind of going out and seeing what the world has to offer. I do have like a bucket list or a checklist of things that I do in every city just to make sure that I'm giving each city a fair shake. So for example, one of those things is I share a meal with a local. And I use the term local very loosely, but I find someone who lives in the community, who lives in the city. Sometimes it's a barber, it's an Uber driver, sometimes it's a random person you find, online, and you just say, hey, listen, I'd love to take you out for a bite to eat. Let's go connect over lunch or dinner, and look and understand their city through their eyes and their perspective. So, there's like 6 or 7 things that I do in every city. And, obviously connect to the Futurist community, connect to clients and partners that are there. And say, I'm here for a little bit, right? Let's talk about the future. Let's engage with this idea for the future. And so it's been a fascinating journey.
So what's the best one? What's the best city so far?
I think Chicago or San Diego really kind of stole my heart. I was just in San Diego.
Very different weather, very different culture. That's interesting.
Yes, absolutely. But so Chicago in the summertime is what I should say. Not in the winter time.
No. Well, which one that surprised you the most? Like you had expectations in your mind. Was it Tulsa?
I went, no, surprisingly not, but that's second, probably that would be my second choice. I went to Denver, Colorado, and I left Denver pretty quickly, just for personal reasons. I think I walked into Denver with certain expectations that weren't met. And so I ended up in Salt Lake City, Utah. And
that's beautiful there.
Yeah, Salt Lake City, Utah actually surprised me. I was like, wow, I did not imagine that I would like Salt Lake City, Utah in the way that I do. And, Steve, part of the criteria, I say criteria, there's, I wake up one morning and decide I'm just going to move here next. And let's just see what happens. But part of the criteria is making sure that I don't have a strong network, that I don't know a lot of people, that, I may have 1 or 2 family friends or, kind of alumni from the school that I went to, my undergrad university. But it's not about moving to places where I have a strong network. It's about moving to places where I don't know many people and trying to find community, trying to find connections. In a certain way, Steve, to bring this back to futures, I actually think I'm a signal for a lifestyle that's going to be a lot more common in the future, whether it's for geopolitical reasons, for climate reasons, for economic reasons. I think people are going to be living much more nomadically in the future than we are today.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Just a quick thing on Salt Lake. I think for me, I'm trying to get my wife to move there. It's actually the best place for if you're active and outdoors, is the best place in the country to live. And it's also obviously as a snowboarder, mountain biker, it's just like kind of heaven, and it's at altitude. So things, melt faster, like kind of in Denver. But the big thing that my wife she's been there a lot, is the subduction layer with smog, because it's in kind of a bowl. I guess the only thing that, you have to be aware of is the weather. But, you and I both lived in San Francisco, and we understand microclimates very well, but it's interesting, and you talk about this nomadic life, and I'm a big fan of the Nomad Capitalist channel. He talks, where you get passports, or like you said, like digital visas, or how I agree. I think more people will be nomadic. It's a question of, there's a lot of complexities and taxes or things that if you're a United States citizen. But do you think that's a signal people are not watching enough, or do you think is there something out there they think people are kind of sleeping on? Because you and I, we watch the landscape a lot.
Listen, there's some interesting signals that come out of this. There are companies that are catering to the nomadic lifestyle.
Yes.
For example, I use this service for apartments, right? It's a network of furnished apartments. I just have to give them a 2 weeks notice, and I bounce around from one apartment to the next. And, it's a really interesting concept. The furnishings are the same. The paintings on the walls are the same. The cutlery, the towels that you dry yourself with are the same. And it's this whole notion of when you step outside, you're in a brand new city, you're in a brand new context, you're in a brand new environment. But when you're in the confines of your home, everything's the same. There's a familiarity. And so it's kind of this concept of what I've been tinkering with, possibly a future book, who knows? But what I'm calling islands of continuity. In a world, in a future that is constantly changing, in a future that is constantly evolving and things are so uncertain, what are those islands of continuity that are going to keep us grounded? What are those islands of continuity that, we understand I can deal with the changing nature of everything else around me because here's the consistent thing.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with you, because I think that they have, there's consistencies like furnishings, things. It's kind of a hotelish model, but it's also, hotels definitely feel like temporary, whereas you need to feel like you're in somebody's place, or like an Airbnb, right? It's lived in it, but there's a familiar, consistency in coffee machines and just little things, right? It's like, 30 different places, 30 different fridges, right? And
That's
it's just,
right.
you want a little, like, okay, they have the same kind of coffee machines. I always have my Keurig or whatever. And it matters, because that takes more brain power and processing than you really want to have. That's why some people wear the same thing every day, because I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And, taking that noise out of the system, allowing you to kind of move. I think things like digital currency will also matter quite a bit. Being able to be portable, and like, I think the big thing is going to be bank accounts. Like, how do you navigate countries with different if you're there for a few months, like, how do you do that, right? And you have a service. I think you're right. There's a lot. I'm seeing things on the quantum computing side that I think a lot of people are sleeping on. I'm, as a digital currency, digital asset person, a lot of the big, like Ledger, they're all trying to kind of quantum secure things, because I think that's the thing that people are freaking out the most, is that people are not paying enough attention to how much quantum is making change and leaps to the point where it's going to become more commercial in the next few years, that I don't think people really realize, and what that's going to do. As we kind of wrap things, I'd love to, we were talking a lot about careers, and I think people listening to this that are futurists, or they, are thinking about this field, and you're a great example of, entering it, growing through it, seeing the future of it. What would you wish you learned? Like, when you work with Bob, what do you think? What would you wish you knew in the beginning of that?
Yeah.
Like, you tell yourself that, right?
Steve, I guess classic, the imposter syndrome sets in very early on. And it's really hard to shake, right? I think there are folks who have the benefit of having studied this and kind of gone through and gotten a professional degree, which I think is great. But for personally, I think for some futurists, they walk in with this certain ambition and this certain kind of thing that they like, and that's kind of their focus. And they try to, become an expert in that field and, become the voice of that future. And I think there's a place for that. But the thing that I've learned from Futures is the most valuable thing Futures has taught me is to challenge assumptions, to challenge our everyday assumptions, right? I mean, I go and I turn on a light switch, and, I don't even think about whether the light is going to come on or not, right?
Yeah, it just does.
I just expect it to happen. And I think a lot of us in business and in society and in our daily lives, we just assume that the world is going to keep spinning and operating the way that it does. And futures thinking is really good at not every time, not every day, but carving out a space to say, but what if the light didn't turn on? What then? Right? Let's just think through the scenarios, the possibilities, what could happen. How do you start to respond? And so I think as people are thinking about or starting off their career in future spaces, never lose sight of futures thinking, testing your assumptions, challenging your assumptions. I do this with coworkers every day, right? It's like, why don't we just talk about, like, do we need oxygen to breathe in the future? Will the sun continue to rise? And, they kind of look at me like, Gabe, you're a little crazy, right? But it's like, that's what futures thinking is going to our everyday assumptions and saying, will the US still be a democracy? Will physical currencies, the way that they are now, will they continue to exist in the future? This whole notion of buying a house and picking one place, and that's where you establish your roots. Is that actually a future that is going to be sustainable? Is that a future that lasts? Is that even a future that we want? And so I think what I've learned, what I would encourage others is to use strategic foresight, to use futures thinking to challenge each and every assumption. not every day. You're not going to challenge, you're not going to spend hours upon hours wondering if the light switch is going to come on or not. But kind of, again, not getting to an answer, but uncovering new challenges, uncovering new questions, uncovering new opportunities, and pulling the thread from the theory into making it practical. Making it applicable, and hopefully building a much more equitable, a much more equal, a much more safe society for the rest of the world. Because having been in 16 cities, I know that that's in short supply, especially here in the United States. And I would hope all of us would dive into foresight with the ambition of getting us to a brighter future.
Well, you're amazingly passionate, and it's been great talking to you. And I think, for you you've got so many more years ahead of you. And if you're looking back at all this, especially this experience that you're living right now, I mean, what do you want someone to it's the legacy question. Like, when you think about the things you leave behind to the field, to, society, what would you like to be, not even remembered? I think that implies like you're gone, but I mean, just sitting on a beach, having a umbrella sweet drink, like that, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and one that I haven't done much thinking around. So thank you.
That's what I'm here for, man.
Thank you for asking.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I guess I would want people to look at me and my journey and understand immediately that, like, I really enjoyed it. I really loved it. I had no regrets, and this whole notion of, like, he just kind of went wherever the wind blew and made the best out of every situation. And, like, that is the best journey he could have been on. That to me would really be satisfying, for people to understand that, I was part reactionary, part kind of thoughtful, in the best of both worlds. And it led to a fulfilling life that had the greatest impact on those around me.
Well said. Well, Gabe, if people want to hunt you down and get to know you better, find you on the web, what's the best place to find your work? And repeat the book again so people can find that on Amazon.
Yeah, so hopefully you go out and get your copy of the book. It's Leaders Make the Future, the 3rd edition, 10 new skills for humanizing leadership in an era of generative AI. G Cervantes at iftf.org. That's my email. Reach out at any time. I'm on LinkedIn, at Gabe the Futurist on Instagram. You can see what new city I'm in, what new city I'm traveling through if you want to reach out. I welcome all forms of contact. I really do love engaging with folks in the future space. So please do reach out at any time.
Cool. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for being on Think Forward. It's been great having you.
Appreciate it, Steve. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Think Forward podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.thinkforwardshow.com, as well as on YouTube under Think Forward Show. See you next time.